Dayna Martin is an author and peaceful parenting advocate, spreading the message of freedom and children's rights. Author of the books Radical Unschooling, A Revolution Has Begun, and Sexy Birth. She's been featured on The Dr. Phil Show, Nightline, 60 Minutes, The Jeff Probst Show, and most recently, ABC's hit show, Wife Swap. Her articles, videos, and TV appearances have helped thousands of families on their path to live with more freedom, peace, and joy. We hear words like rebellion and chalk it up to normalcy. But what if there was nothing to rebel against? What if we lived with the same respect for our children that we demand they have for us? What if we could recognize that punishments model injustice, and that through using power to control another person, we are teaching them to do the same? It is through loving, kindness, and understanding that children learn love and peace, and in turn will reflect this back on the world. Respecting children's rights and freedoms is a revolutionary approach to parenting and education. This is a parenting philosophy on the leading edge of new thought, yet it is rooted in instinctual wisdom. Our culture needs to realize that living with respect and freedom with our children is the most responsible way to create a peaceful world.
Welcome to Try This at Home. This is Dayna Martin. We had a great show last week. We had a lot of great comments on YouTube in regards to it. I love that people are enjoying the show and getting a lot out of it. It's great to be here as a resource for people. So this is my 4th show. My son Devin's here helping me. He's my tech guy tonight. He'll be available for questions halfway through the show if anyone's interested in asking him anything based on our topic. Tonight's topic is on... I was inspired by parenting in the news this week, and I'll tell you why. A bill is attempting to be passed in Kansas. I'm sure if you're on Facebook, I'm sure you've seen this or heard about it. CNN says a Kansas state lawmaker says a bill she's introduced a bill that would give school teachers and caregivers rights to spank children. She is saying that this is not intended to legalize child abuse. The Democratic State Representative Gail Finney of Wichita put out a statement Tuesday after media stories about her legislation, which would expand on current Kansas law by allowing teachers and caregivers to spank children up to 10 times, possibly causing redness and bruising. Well, if anybody knows me and knows about my show, you know that I oppose any kind of punishment toward children. This is the one step that raises, I think people understand spanking as punitive. We're going to go a lot deeper in tonight's show, but let me go on with this story here. The legislation specifically would allow for spanking up to 10 forceful applications in a succession of a bare, open hand palm against the clothed buttocks of a child, and any such reasonably physical force on the child must be necessary to hold, restrain, or control the child in the course of maintaining an authority over the child, acknowledging that redness or bruising may occur on the tender skin of a child as a result. The parental corporal discipline in Kansas, along with 49 other states, has always been permitted, which is crazy to me. Unfortunately, Kansas has never affirmatively defined corporal discipline in Kansas statute, leaving the interpretation of the matter to administrative officials in the executive branch, law enforcement personnel, and in the judicial branch. Finney went on to write that her bill is intended to provide guidance to state officials in the administrative and judicial branches and serve as a guideline to parents, and to protect Kansas children from abuse, which is really crazy to me. If you're hitting a child in any way, that's abuse and it's violence. Never mind being allowed to leave a mark. It's really insane right now. There's so much controversy surrounding it. I don't think the bill will pass. I really encourage people to write and support this not getting passed through as a bill. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to send me a message in the chat room. Devin's got an eye on that tonight. And feel free to call in halfway through our show with your questions or just a statement on how you feel about spanking. I want to go a little bit deeper than just the thoughts on the damage of spanking. In fact, people are really surprised when I do any kind of media appearance and I share that my children have never been punished. Not in any way. Not a timeout, not a spank. we have always parented them in partnership, which is a really different way to go about parenting. It's a peaceful way. It is very different than the authoritarian approach. Even people that aren't for spanking, they really believe in some form of discipline and punishment in the way that will manipulate a child's behavior and get them to obey. So my children have never been punished, and yet they're amazingly kind, loving individuals. And I think when Devin hears something about spanking, or any of my kids do, it's really mind-blowing when somebody's hearing this. I mean, Devin's 14 years old and never been punished. And when people hear this, they think that not punishing leads to unprepared people who have no respect for other people, and they say they're going to be spoiled brats. And I'm sure you listening may even have some ideas as to what that means. But I'm going to go a little deeper and explain to you in detail what I mean by not punishing and why we choose not to with a partnership paradigm. And also the negative, effects of punishment and what you can do instead. I think that's so helpful. It's one thing to share what you're against, but I think giving you tools to help your kids instead of punishing can be truly, truly helpful. So I'm going to read a short article of Thoughts on Punishment by Sidney Craig. He's a doctor, and he has written a lot. The Natural Child Project is a great resource if any of you are looking for thoughts on punishment and anti-punishment types of websites. Jan Hunt is a friend of mine. She runs the site. I have some of my articles on there, but I'm going to be referencing a few different articles from that resource because I want you to know it's not just me that has these ideas. There's a lot of people and doctors and people that are, very well educated about what happens psychologically to a child when they're punished. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts from some extraordinary people tonight, and feel free again to comment. I want to hear what you have to say about this. So Thoughts on Punishment by Sidney Craig. The most commonly used and socially acceptable parental response to a display of irrational behavior, like a temper tantrum, for example, is to punish the child for it. Most parents operate according to the widely held belief that the child will not repeat a form of behavior which has been administered a dose of pain, whether emotional or physical, I want to add. This technique has a kind of surface validity because very often in the face of repeated punishment and threats of punishment, a child will stop a particular form of behavior. When the offensive form of behavior diminishes in frequency, the parent is reassured that he's following the proper philosophy and fulfilling his duty both in the child and to broader society. Unfortunately, the problem is much more complex. Irrationality has an inner, unobservable quality as well as an outer observable behavioral manifestation. When the parent punishes the child, all that the child does is to eliminate the overt evidence of his irrational needs, desires, and way of thinking. Punishment does not change in any manner whatsoever the underlying thought process that produced the unacceptable behavior originally. The badness has merely gone underground. When a parent depends to a greater extent on disapproval and punishment as the means of dealing with their child's unacceptable behavior, a long-term process of building anger within the child takes place. And I want you to know, coming from a personal experience, I'm sure many of you might be saying, well, I'm fine. I was punished and spanked and I'm fine. We're going to find out. We're really going to explore this further, but I will say I can relate to this. I understand what they're saying and I can remember these similar feelings. So just open your mind, and if you're resistant to hearing this, just take it in. Just humor yourself and just see how you feel when you're being led down this path. Gradually and imperceptibly, over a period of years, angry feelings are growing and competing with loving feelings for control of the child's personality. The parent remains unaware that there's anything to be concerned about because outwardly, in response to punishment, the child is behaving dutifully and is gradually eliminating all the ways in which poorly trained children act. But after years and years of latency period, this irrational anger that's been accumulating comes to outweigh the power of loving feelings to restrain them. When this occurs, the outward behavior of the child changes radically. The typical delinquent picture then emerges, reflecting this intense angry feelings that have been building up inside. Even at this point, it can't be said that the child does not love his parents. He still loves them and at times may act very lovingly, but the angry feelings predominate and determine the major portion of the child's behavior. The change from good to bad behavior is often sudden, occurring most frequently when the child approaches adolescence. For this reason, parents are likely to blame the change on change coincidences, not recognizing that they're witnessing the fruition of a lifelong process. Some parents review their own behavior and conclude that they had not been punitive enough, believing that if they had just been tougher, they would have gained complete control over the child's bad impulses. And some people blame drugs, as if the use of drugs, rather than being symptomatic of a person sick with rage, had caused the child's behavior to change. Parents who assess the situation in this manner are merely deceiving themselves. They're either unaware or are refusing to recognize the long-term deterioration of their relationship with their child. If parents can recognize and acknowledge the threat that punishment presents to the parent-child relationship, they can take steps while their child is still young to protect the relationship. And how many of you agree with this? I'm really anxious to hear. I completely do, obviously. And I can see, I remember friends who would, look at that show Leave It to Beaver from like even before my time. My mother loved that show, and she said like she used to call kids Eddie Haskell, and I guess that character from the show would act all sweet and nice and would completely comply and be very obedient in front of an adult's face, but then behind their back would show their true colors. That's one thing with unschoolers and kids that have been raised in this peaceful paradigm is there is no difference in their personality whatsoever. In my experience with hundreds of kids and teens that are living this life, they are who they are. They don't need to put on masks for different people. They don't have to put on the mask of the good, sweet child in the face of authority because they don't want to be disapproved of. And this is really gaining momentum. A lot of people are seeing this. So that is one article that I really love. I'm reading some comments from the chat room to see. Well, I'm seeing somebody commented that they think they turned out all right. I think that's used a lot, but you say that, but really who would you be without that? Nobody ever knows. It's just a kind of a guess. It's a judgment guess that you turned out all right. Well, you're still functioning and walking through life, but how happy could you be? How productive? How self-fulfilled? No one ever knows. So it's kind of just something people say. Let's see. This is a really great article that I want to share with you guys too. It's called How Children Really React to Control. Control is something that we do not strive for at all in our relationship with our children. We strive for connection over control. We don't need to train our kids to be obedient. It's not the focus of our parenting. Most of our parenting is done really differently. I think the mainstream really focuses on obedience over even a loving, close relationship with your child. And you don't realize how trained you are as an adult, as a parent, to promote this philosophy for the greater good of the government. Like, you are trained and told by experts, by doctors, by all the books that are out there. They train you to train your children to be obedient. So really, you've just been a pawn in the big game, and you have to realize that and wake up. Remember your own experience. And I think it's so important to open our hearts to understanding when people, other people, friends, family, aren't in awareness of this kind of philosophy. I was posting on my wall about this show, and I had a friend who I've known for 20 years post on the wall on the thread, saying that, well, I wasn't a bad parent because I punished, and people get really, really defensive to this type of parenting when they hear it. No matter how peacefully you describe it to people get really triggered. And I think they get triggered in a state when they're feeling self-doubt or insecurity. I think if a person's really, really secure in how they did things, you don't necessarily trigger them. My mother parented differently, and she's so open-minded about this kind of perspective. You only can do what you know how to do at the time. So guilt and feeling bad and defensiveness to people living this life is not at all productive, and it doesn't help your relationship. So our goal is to shift from control to connection, to take the focus of parenting on of love and a close connected relationship over controlling and obedience. So that is the topic of tonight's show. I'd love to read this article to you. How Children Really React to Control. This is by Thomas Gordon, PhD. When one person tries to control another, you can always expect some kind of reaction from the controlee. The use of power involves two people in a special kind of relationship, one wielding power and the other reacting to it. This seemingly obvious fact is not usually dealt with in the writings of the dare to discipline advocates. Invariably, they leave the child out of the formula, omitting any reference to how the youngster reacts to the control of his or her parents or teachers. They insist parents must set limits, but seldom say anything about how children respond to having their needs denied in this way. Parents should not be afraid to exercise their authority, they counsel. but rarely mention how youngsters react to authority-based coercion. By omitting the child from the interaction, the discipline advocates leave the impression that the child submits willingly and consistently to adults' power and does precisely what is demanded. Here are some actual quotes from many Power to the Parent books that I've collected. Be firm but fair. Insist that your children obey. Don't be afraid to express disapproval by spanking. There are times when you have to say no. Discipline with love. Demonstrate your parental right to lead. The toddler should be taught to obey and yield to parental leadership. What these books have in common is advocacy of the use of power-based discipline with no mention of how children react to it. In other words, the Dare to Discipline advocates never present power-based discipline in full as a cause and effect phenomenon, an action and reaction event. This omission is important, for it implies that all children passively submit to adult demands, perfectly content and secure in an obedient role, first in relationships with their parents and teachers, and eventually with all adult power wielders that they might encounter in their lifetime. However, I found not a shred of evidence to support this view. In fact, as most of us remember only too well from our own childhoods, we did almost anything we could to defend against power-based control. We tried to avoid it, postpone it, weaken it, avert it, escape from it. We lied, we put the blame on someone else, we tattled, we hid, we pleaded, we begged for mercy, or promised we would never do it again. We also experienced punitive discipline as embarrassing, demeaning, humiliating, frightening, and painful. To be coerced into doing something against our will was a personal insult and an affront to our dignity, an act that devalued the importance of our needs. Punitive discipline is by definition need-depriving as opposed to need-satisfying. Recall that punishment will be effective only if it's felt by the child as averse, painful, and unpleasant. When controllers employ punishment, they always intend for it to cause deprivation or pain. It seems so obvious that the children don't ever want punitive discipline. Contrary to what the advocates would have us believe, no child ever asks for it or feels a need for it or is grateful for it. I can remember Devin was maybe, 2 years old. Well, he was maybe 2.5 because I had Tiffany. She was a baby in the sling, and I met this woman at a secondhand clothing store. And she seemed really nice, and I think as a lot of young mothers, I really would love to make friends and connect with other moms. When you first step into the realm of stay-at-home motherhood, it's lonely and you don't really know your identity. And this woman invited me over her house, and I live kind of in the middle of nowhere, so anywhere you go to visit somebody, it's quite a journey. So I think it took me 45 minutes to get to her house in the winter. And I went in, and everything seemed okay for the first couple minutes, and then I looked around me and I noticed all these Bible verses on their walls, and I was cool with it. I was like, I understand some people are religious. I don't need to have the same beliefs as everybody. And then she had a little baby who was probably 7 months old, and the baby crawled over to the stairs. And she walked over to this baby and swatted it with a wooden spoon on the leg. And I was horrified. The thing that horrified me the most, though, was that this child didn't even cry. It just knew what to do, and it just crawled away. Like it was almost as if the child was used to being disciplined. Well, every time this baby would, discipline punitively, every time this baby would reach for something that the mother didn't think was okay, she would take her hand and flick it. She would flick the child, and he'd pull his hand away. There was no conversation. It was just this complete physical control. And when we sat at lunch, she made us this nice lunch, and we sat there, and I was pretty mortified, quiet. I didn't know whether I should leave. I'm trying to, in my mind at the time, I mean, now, if it was now, I never would even walk in somebody's house if I felt that abuse was happening. But at the time, this is all new to me. I'm developing my own philosophical beliefs, and I'm sitting at the table, and all the kids are completely quiet with their heads down and not even talking and just eating. And the mother just started asking me, like, how do you feel about spanking? And I said, well, I'm not on board with it. It's not something I think I need to do. Well, she handed me a book. Said, I highly recommend this book. And I still have it. And I have to tell you, the reason I kept it is because reading it has proven to be an incredible resource. The book is called The Train Up a Child. And it is hugely controversial. It is so unbelievably violent, what it endorses for children, that I had to read it. I was in awe. But it really educated me as to what people who are told to really punitively discipline their children, what they're reading and what's being endorsed. And I tried to get inside the head of the authors and just figure out why on earth they would look at children as if they were some kind of animals that needed training. Well, even more strange and perverse is the mother was bringing up spanking and really defending it and saying she thought it was so good for kids. And I remember this little 6-year-old, this woman's oldest child at the time, out of 5 kids, she had a lot of kids, said to me, I need to be spanked, and I like it. I'm really grateful for when my parents do, and it's the only way I can be good. And it was obvious she was parroting something that was really drilled in her head. And I never forgot that visit, because I never called the woman back. She called a few more times, and I just never answered, and I just kind of let the relationship drift away. If it was now, I would really maybe explain as to why I couldn't contact the woman, but it always stayed in my mind to be among a woman whose children were extremely punitively disciplined, and their attitudes and just the way they felt. They weren't children. They didn't act like children. They weren't playing like children. They weren't allowed to laugh and I know that that's extreme, but I'm sharing with you that children that are really young can be brainwashed to think that it's really good for them to be spanked if the parents say it enough. And how warped is that? So there is no child ever forgets or forgives a punitive parent or teacher. This is why I find it incredible that the authors of Power to the Parent books try to justify power-based discipline with such crazy statements as, kids not only need punishment, they want it. Children basically want what's coming to them, good or bad, because justice is security. That one's insane to me. Punishment will prove to kids that their parents love them. People say that to me, and that's sad. That blows me away that would never show my children that I love them by hurting them. The youngster who knows he deserves a spanking appears almost relieved when it finally comes. Rather than being insulted by the discipline, the child understands its purpose and appreciates the control it gives over him or her own impulses. Have you guys ever heard any of these? I've heard a few of them. Corporal punishment in the hands of a loving parent is entirely different in purpose and practice from child abuse. One in the act of love and the other is an act of hostility. Some strong-willed children absolutely demand to be spanked, and their wishes should be granted. Punishment will make children feel more secure in the relationship. Can you imagine if wives were in place of children in that sentence? Punishment will make wives feel more secure in their relationship. It's crazy. Discipline makes for happy families and healthy relationships. Could these be rationalizations intended to relieve the guilt that controllers feel after coercing or committing acts of physical violence against their children? It seems possible in view of the repeated insistence that the punishing adult is really a loving adult doing it only for the child's own good, or as a dutiful act of benevolent leadership. It appears that being firm in an autocrat is justifiable as long as you're a benevolent autocrat. Coercing children is okay as long as you're not a dictator, and physically abusing children is not abuse as long as you do it lovingly. Disciplinarians' insistence that punishment is benign and constructive might be explained by their desire that children eventually become subservient to a supreme being or a higher authority. This can only be achieved, they believe, if children first learn to obey their parents and other adults. James Dobson from 1978 stresses this point time and time again. While yielding to the loving leadership of their parents, children are also learning to yield to the benevolent leadership of God himself. With regard to the specific discipline of the strong-willed toddler, mild spankings can begin around 15 and 18 months of age. To repeat, the toddler should be taught to obey and yield to a parental leadership, but that end will not be accomplished overnight. It's the familiar story of believing that the ends justify the means. Obedience to parental authority first, and then later to some higher authority, is so strongly valued by some advocates of punitive discipline that the means they utilize to achieve the end are distorted to appear beneficial to the children rather than harmful. The hope that children eventually will submit to all authority is wishful thinking. Not all children submit when adults try to control them. In fact, children respond with a wide variety of reactions and an assortment of behaviors. Psychologists call these reactions coping behaviors or coping mechanisms. The coping mechanisms children use. Over the years, I've compiled a long list of the various coping mechanisms youngsters use when adults try to control them. The question yields nearly identical lists in every class, which confirms how universal children's coping mechanisms are. The complete list is reproduced below in no particular order. Some of the coping mechanisms that are listed here I can totally relate to. See if you guys can relate to anything I'm sharing on this list. Resisting, defying, being negative. Rebelling, disobeying, being insubordinate, sassing, striking back, counterattacking, vandalizing. I did some vandalization. Is that a word? Vandalization? I did some vandalizing in my day. We've talked about my spray paint years back when I was 13. Let's see, breaking rules and laws, throwing temper tantrums, getting angry, lying, deceiving, hiding the truth, blaming others, tattling, telling on others, bossing or bullying others, banding together, forming alliances or cliques, organizing against the adult, buttering up, soft soaping, apple polishing, bootlicking, currying favor with adults. That was kind of me, actually. I would totally do that after a while. I would have to be the teacher's pet. I would manipulate. I can remember, wow, this is like such a trip looking back. Withdrawing, fantasizing, daydreaming, competing, needing to win, hating to lose, needing to look good, making others look bad. Leaving, escaping, staying away from home, running away, quitting school, cutting class, not talking, ignoring, using the silent treatment, crying, weeping, feeling depressed, becoming fearful, shy, timid, afraid to speak up, hesitant to try anything new, needing reassurance, seeking constant approval, feeling insecure, getting sick, developing ailments, overeating, excessive dieting. I was anorexic for my teen years, were a lot of girls, drinking heavily, using drugs, cheating in school, being submissive, conforming, complying, being a goody-goody teacher's pet. Oh, I just said that. So hearing that list, you know what's so twisted is in a lot of parenting books, we are told that these feelings are these traits are normal of a child or teen. They are not normal. This is not child or teen behavior. This is a side effect of being young. This is a result of control and punishment. There is not a unschooler that I've met, no matter what age, that have gone through many of these at all, if any. I know my kids haven't. I mean, I'm sure hearing their crying and weeping is part of being human, but these are not a result of childhood. They are purely results of control. As you might expect, after parents and teachers in the class generate their list and realize that it was created out of their own experience, they invariably make such comments as, so this doctor is asking people to make a list, and he is evaluating the list. So then after people make the list, this doctor is asking anybody to make comments on their list, and their results are saying, why would anyone use power? These are the behaviors that it produces. All of these coping mechanisms are behaviors that I wouldn't want to see my children have. I don't see the list as any good effects of positive behavior. If we reacted to power in those ways when we were kids, our children certainly will too. After the exercise of having people make lists of these traits, many parents and most teachers undergo a 180-degree shift in their thinking. They see much more clearly that power creates the very behavior patterns that they most dislike in children, and they begin to understand that as parents and teachers, they're paying a terrible price for using power. They're causing their children or students to develop habits, traits, and characteristics considered both unacceptable by most adults and unhealthy by mental health professionals. Incredible. It says a comment says, Dayna, I would hope that those that know me would say it turned out all right. Keep telling yourself that. I'm sure you're a fine human being. We've all been through it. However, I'm saying, who knows how much more amazing you could be. Let's see. I'm taking calls now. We are halfway through the program. If anybody has a call with a question or comment, please call in. The number is 1-718-717-8296. The next thing I wanted to share with you guys is this. Let's see. I'm reading in the chat room. Joe Friday says it is the favorite project in woodshop was making one of the teachers a new paddle. Well, think about that. Think about that. They wanted to make a paddle to see somebody else get hit because it feels really good when you're abused. It's a false sense of relief, but to see somebody else get abused instead of yourself always felt better. Let's see. I'm going to read an article to you guys called Violence is Violence by Jesper Jewell. I found this really, was so many articles to choose from. I picked my favorites to share with you to really help you guys understand that this is an evolved perspective. It wasn't very long ago that men were told to beat their wives and force their wives to obey. And we've come so far from there since that time. Actually, it's amazing. I think that we've come further than we have, actually, because I work with people who are dealing with this still, being told by their church men, being told to beat their wives, to make them obey. So it really is still going out there. However, in my awareness and most of what I'm in, what the media is promoting even is anti-abuse towards women. And the same exact thing is happening with children. I really believe when we see a big push like we have with this Kansas spanking debate, I think it's a result of peaceful parenting and a more evolved approach becoming recognized, and it's just a pushback. I know that we're making a difference. I see it every day. I see progress. I see more peaceful parenting in the media, and this is just a pushback from it. So when you see it come in your news feed, know that it's because that I think we're really getting ahead with this kind of perspective, and it takes shows like this and people that are open-minded enough to see, even if you turned out okay, I turned out okay, look, and we're all okay, but it does not give a reason to abuse a child. That if you can be open-minded enough to say, wow, my parents did what they knew how to do, but you know better now. So when you know better, you do better. That Maya Angelou quote, I love it. It's one of my favorite quotes. So you don't need to hold on to your own self-worth and self-value and defend the right to spank your children or the fact that you raised them with punitive discipline. If you can be evolved and open-minded enough to say, if I knew then what I knew now, I wouldn't have gone that route, but it's what you knew. I mean, so you don't want to punish yourself for doing what you knew at the time. But, once you hear this perspective, I have to say that it's really rare that somebody de-evolves from this awareness. So you're hearing it, and so you are being brought to a higher level of consciousness about children's rights through this program like this, and I hope you realize that there's so many different alternatives. This article is called Violence is Violence. Integrity and self-esteem are related. The more successful parents look after their child's integrity, the greater the possibility that the child will develop a healthy self-esteem. Violence is an infringement of children's integrity and therefore detrimental to their self-esteem. The fact that we have laws that forbid grievous physical violence against children does not mean that other forms of violence are not harmful. We have simply decided that the manifestations of violence should not be classified as criminal. Over time, we've coined many synonyms for physical violence. In Denmark, we refer to a parent's right to inflict corporal punishment, and we talk about smacks or slaps in the United States. Parents talk about disciplining and spanking. In short, most cultures have their own pet names that people use in order to justify the phenomenon. But no euphemism can obscure the fact that violence is violence, and that violence destroys the self-esteem and dignity of the victim and perpetrator. In my experience, parents who use violence on their children can be divided into three groups. The first group uses violence as an attitude or ideology. The parents say, well, I don't think that it does children any harm to get a smack on their bottom when they deserve it. If pressed, they usually admit that they didn't feel this way before they became parents, and that their change of heart reflects an attempt to make a virtue out of a necessity. Those parents who use the form of violence, such as spanking, represents an ideology who believe that violence is an essential part of responsible child rearing, often come from environments or societies that are dominated by totalitarianism ideologies, whether religious or political. I'm getting a call. I'm happy to take this call and put this article on hold.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air with Try This at Home. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
What kind of question do you have for us?
Actually, I just wanted to ask a question about with unschooling. When the kid turns 18 and he's a graduate of the program, if you want to even call it that, do they still end up taking some sort of a placement exam like a GED course and a GED test so that they can still progress on in life if they want to, like, let's say, join the military or go to college?
If they want to. There's a lot of ways that unschoolers go about this. You can. Colleges love unschooled kids. Actually, there's a real need for them in colleges because just cookie cutter kids with the same kind of portfolio is not impressive anymore. To have a kid that has been self-directed and a child that is anxious to learn, colleges are sorting out homeschooled and unschooled children for their program, so it's not an issue. They can take any kind of equivalency test to get in. And there's a whole movement in addition to what I'm sharing called an uncollege movement, actually. I really believe that colleges are businesses out to make money, and that our children that are unschooled, they learn how to learn. I mean, when my kids want to know something, they know how to find the answers. They're not just obeying orders to, memorize certain things out of a textbook. These kids know how to learn, and so anything that my children want to learn about, I know they could do on their own. And with the internet and all the resources that are out there, there's nothing that you can learn at college that you can't learn at home. Of course, being a doctor, and there are certain careers that take intense learning, but I know that any unschooler that wants to go on for these careers does so easily and joyfully because they're internally motivated to do so. So I invite you to do a Google search for unschooling in college, and you're going to find a lot of great information. There's a woman who has a whole website dedicated. I think her last name is McGee, but just search unschooling in college and you can find the many ways for children to go on.
Yeah, I knew that. I thought it was a wonderful way of looking at it, but I just didn't know if with specific things like you said with medicine or law where there's intense schooling, does the colleges not really require a high school diploma, or would they demand that the child still had to take the GED course in order to be able to pursue if they wanted to go in that direction?
I think it depends on I think it depends on the college. There's unschoolers in Harvard right now, so I mean, people are doing it. So yeah, I think it just depends on the individual college, but some unschoolers go on to take the GED.
Okay.
Yep. Well, thanks so much for your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything else for us?
I just really love the episode of Wife Swap. It was probably the only good one they ever had.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. You. I'm glad to hear it. Thanks. Bye. Awesome. I like people that have seen. If you guys haven't seen our Wife Swap episode, of course it's in traditional Wife Swap form. Some of it's, silly, but some of it is really moving. It's real, which is what a lot of people ask me, is it scripted? And none of it was scripted. It was all completely authentic. The only thing that was ever not scripted but organized was they have to tell you, okay, why don't we make dinner now? And they kind of direct you because they have to know what's happening next. But as far as what you're seeing on screen unfold, it was completely emotional, and there was so much that happened off camera that was a really powerful experience that they couldn't air because it was a really personal experience for both families. Okay, I am seeing a question. Great question, Ghost of Jimmy. Dayna, what do you think about a non-physical punishment like grounding or taking privileges away? Well, let's talk about that. That's the authoritarian paradigm as well, and that's focusing on behavior and not the needs under the behavior. We don't live life like that. My kids have never been grounded or had anything taken away. In fact, if something comes up, we just address it. And I think no, Wife Swap was not edited to my approval. No, you don't have any say. When America sees it is when you see it for the first time. So somebody just asked if was Wife Swap edited to your approval. No. When you go into a show like that, they have complete control to edit it in any way that they want. That's part of the deal. Not everyone's willing to take that risk. We are. We've done it several times, and we still trust the process. So, that anything that you say on camera or on that mic could be shown. So you got to really try not to swear too much. So let's see. No, we don't take privileges away. We've never done anything like that. I'm going to go into a little more detail as to why that is or how you can understand that more here. I'm going to finish this article. Thank you guys for these questions. They're great. The parents for whom use of violence represents an ideology and who believe that violence is an essential part of responsible child rearing often come from environments or societies that are dominated by totalitarian ideologies. I already read that. And the third group, the parents, including the typical Scandinavian parent who hit their children on occasion but feel bad about it each time, say, regardless of the parent's attitude, all violence towards children has the exact same consequence as violence toward adults. It creates anxiety, mistrust, and feelings of guilt in the short term, low self-esteem, anger, and violence in the long term. The repercussions of violence are not necessarily proportional to how often a child is hit. I've met people who have been treated violently by their parents, on only one occasion in the course of their childhood and adolescence, who have never recovered from the pain. I've also met people who have been hit on from 10 to 20 occasions who bear few scars. So the factor that seems to have an impact is on how seriously an act of violence will reverberate, is whether the parents take responsibility for the violence or blame their child for it. So say that you're a parent still learning these things, or I work with people all the time that they know they don't want to hit, but sometimes they scream or threaten, or if you act in any way, like I've said on the show before, that you feel bad about or guilty about, you are human, and if you're tired or hungry, you can't always parent from like a place of presence and balance. Sometimes we say things we don't mean. It's how you handle it after. It's being able to say, I'm sorry, I was really tired, I was hungry, I shouldn't have treated you that way, you didn't deserve it, I was really upset about this, and then you can talk it through. So if you do make a mistake and you do something that you regret, talk to your kids about it. It really makes a huge difference. Okay. Thoughts on punishment. Let's see. The most commonly used and socially acceptable parental response to a display of irrational behavior is to punish a child for it. We've already talked about that. So when our culture trains us as parents to focus on behavior and control behavior, it really takes into no account at all the needs of a child. So unschooling or peaceful parenting, partnership parenting philosophy does not focus on behavior. We focus on the needs under the behavior. But that's such a different way to look at it. I mean, especially when have a lot of young kids and you're dealing with them fighting, for example, and you're dealing with a lot of angst, and it's really intense and loud. Sometimes it is hard to focus on the needs under the child's behavior, but once you shift your thinking and you really begin to do that, that's where you can become your child's partner in life. So I like to think of myself as my children's partner. In the authoritarian paradigm, you're the wall between your child and their desires. And with a partnership parenting dynamic, you help your children get what they want in life. What does that trigger in you to hear, that you help your children get what they want? Does it trigger the thoughts that your children will be spoiled and entitled and take advantage and manipulate and be brats? If that's what came to your mind, take a deep breath and know that you were brainwashed. If that's the first thought that comes to your mind, that is not a natural thought. That is a conditioned response for people that needed to somehow feel better about controlling you. You were told it was for your own good your whole life. You were told, I'm doing this for your own good because I love you. And if I don't do this, you're going to be a brat. And you heard all around you when you saw children acting up in the space of your parents or other caregivers, when they judged and commented on those so-called bratty children, that, they are not disciplined, they are not punished. And you were brainwashed and conditioned to believe these things that are not reality. No matter how evolved you are watching this show, and I know this audience is an amazing, evolved group. I do. I mean, I know a lot of you and your mindsets, but for some reason with parenting, a lot of you are really don't get it. And you need to, because this is the future. How you parent conducts how your children are going to parent. And peace comes from a peaceful place and how you're raising another human being. So let's talk a little bit about, you guys have seen the nanny shows, you've seen the people that are against spanking, but what about like the people that are talking about timeouts is better? I'm sure you've heard that. And timeouts are better than spanking. Let's address some of this here. Timeouts are still control. When you're putting your child in a timeout, it's still focusing on behavior and controlling behavior. In fact, I think they're almost crueler sometimes because they're so long and drawn out. One second here. I thought I was organized with this paperwork. Here we go. I got it. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about timeouts here. Let's see. Hi, Anonymous, 740. Thanks for stopping in to listen from Washington State. I'm glad you're here. Let's talk about timeouts for a minute. And guys, don't forget, call in if you have any questions. I want to be a resource for you. Any comments, any questions? This is how you learn. You got to ask me. And I am happy to share. There's no comment or question that I would ever consider foolish or silly, because if you think I would think that, then you are conditioned and controlled by teachers. I'm not like that. Open your mind. Let's see. So timeout. Peter Harriman writes, when timeout is used, parents first firmly demand that their child stop misbehaving and be quiet. The child is then usually required to go and sit alone in a room away from parents and admonished to not come out of the room until they're sure that they can control their behavior. I remember watching this on the John and Kate Plus 8. Those poor little kids were sent on that little carpet like little dogs. It just was so sad to me. Although she has 8 kids, I'm sure that peaceful parenting would have taken a lot more time for that control freak mother. Let's see. I'd like to wife swap with her. I'll tell you that. She doesn't have a husband, though, right now, so. Let's see. Being placed in timeout prolongs the time that a child must endure the frustrated need that caused the behavior. Thus, unmet normal needs become increasingly uncomfortable as the timeout continues. Young children depend upon, want to be with, love, and need their parents. What exasperates this increasingly uncomfortable state of being frustrated is the fact that the child must be alone, away from the parents who they must rely upon to meet their needs. This enforced separation from their basic source of comfort, security, and well-being adds considerably to the woe of a child. Moreover, being alone in timeout can create additional disturbing feelings that the child must endure. Painful emotions like fear and worry often develop. A frustrated child who must sit quietly and alone in timeout frequently becomes angry. Although the youngster dare not express this anger, when in timeout, the child often expresses it by becoming angry and defiant sometimes after being released from timeout. The practice of separating a child in timeout from parents can in itself be the cause of future misbehavior, because being alone in a timeout increases the frustrations felt by a child who is already frustrated. I've seen this so many times on those nanny shows, man. Have you? Nanny 911, Super Nanny? I've seen this, and it's crazy because people think that these children that they're watching are absolute brats, when what you're seeing is a side effect of punishment and control. A child that's not punished does not act that way. It seems when my kids watch it, we've seen it just watching the sheer phenomenon of control, and the kids are like, why are those kids acting so strange? Why are they acting like that? That is not normal childhood behavior. Again, you're seeing a complete side effect of control and punishment. Interpersonal dilemmas and conflicts are best resolved when each individual has sufficient opportunity to talk and be heard by the other person. Modeling, initiating, and practicing the process of open dialogue is essential if your youngster is to learn healthy problem solving. Does timeout lend itself to the process? Helping children talk about how they feel, combined with parental patience, is required if children are to develop the ability to verbalize their feelings and needs rather than act them out. One thing I've said before, and I'm going to say again, that punishment and timeout, spanking, that all meets the adult's needs only. It's a very narcissistic approach to only be focused on your needs being met and controlling the behavior of another so your needs are met. It's selfish. In fact, when you really need to focus on the needs of everybody equally in your family to raise healthy, non-narcissistic human beings. I'm seeing a question come in. It says, Dayna, I don't believe in spanking. My children aren't punished either. One thing that I struggle with, though, is how to handle when my children are roughhousing and hitting each other. Sometimes it just goes too far. They say that they're playing, but sometimes usually ends up hurt because they're chasing each other around the house, wrestling and hitting. How do you handle it when your children hit the other? I was dealing with this right before this show, actually, with my kids, with Ivy and Orion. They're the 2 youngest, and I just check in with them. Like, they said that they wanted to play fight, and I just make sure that both children are mutually wanting to. And then oftentimes they get a little rough with each other, and sometimes they get hurt, and Orion, who's 6, ends up getting a little bonk and crying, and I just empathize and give him a hug. I don't shame him. I don't say, see, that's what you get when you play fight. I don't do anything but be there to support them. I mean, Devin's 14 and he loves to play fight and wrestle. It's just part of being a child. But children, when they get hurt, they express it through crying or upset, unlike adults who kind of just have been taught not really to express their feelings in that way. So I am there and I support them, and as long as they're both mutually wanting to, they can wrestle any time. Orion had a stick. What was it, a staff, Devin? Yeah. Devin made Orion a staff, and it's kind of big, and so he had it in his hand, and I just asked him, I said, can you not use that in the house in the living room, buddy? I don't want to break the TV, or we have a few breakables in here. Would you mind just not using that in this room? And he said, okay, and he put it down. I talk to my kids like they're human beings. They're not used to having me stand between them and their desires, they know I will help them get what they want in life. So if Orion really wanted to use the staff, then I'd suggest either go outside or let's go in this other room. Like, I want him to be able to use it, but there's times where there's places that it's not safe to use, so I just ask him, and he is totally cool with it. So let's see. Lifelong effects of frequent timeouts. For the frustrated and uncomfortable child, timeout offers enforced silence and the feeling of being rejected by one's parents. A youngster who misbehaves and is then given a timeout feels hurt. This hurt, combined with frustration that caused the youngster to misbehave, gives birth to anger. And discipline practices like timeout, which create hurt and anger, can harm a child. The serious cost of being given a timeout in childhood is the lesson that one should bottle up uncomfortable emotions. Upset in timeout and unable to express distressed feelings, youngsters desperately need to stop their painful feelings from going on inside of them. So to cope, children learn to ignore or distract themselves from the energy of their hurt and angry feelings. Thus, children repress their painful feelings, and in the process, nervous habits emerge, such as thumb-sucking, fingernail biting, hair pulling, skin scratching, tugging at clothes, self-pinching, and many other similar behaviors. The purpose of these behaviors is to ward off uncomfortable feelings and, in identification with their parents' criticism, to punish themselves. These defense strategies serve to release anger and ignore uncomfortable feelings. I want to add stuttering to this list. I've seen that too. As a result, being unaware of true feelings can often become a characteristic featured in a person's life. This reduces a person's self-awareness and can affect the quality of life through their entire lifetime. So how do you develop a well-behaved child? What do you do? What are some tools here? I'm telling you everything not to do, but what do you do instead? Parents can develop a well-behaved, self-disciplined child best by responsively and continuously meeting their developmentally normal needs and drives, by demonstrating and articulating humane values in day-to-day interactions with their youngster, and by exposing their child to life experiences that strengthen and reinforce the values. Troubled and spoiled children are created when parents do not meet their child's normal needs and drives consistently and appropriately. This is the number one thing that I get in the media, talk shows and stuff like that accused of, is that my children are going to be troubled, spoiled, and a problem to society. And I like to say that that's children who are ignored. This is children who are neglected. This is not my children. So we really think in black and white in our culture. Not many people are speaking out for this kind of thing. I mean, you hear a lot of control, and then people think if you're not controlling and punishing or in being strict and punitive, that you must not be doing anything because you've been conditioned to believe that. We are here to say there's an entirely different way to be with children that takes a lot of focus. It's not for the lazy parent at all. If you're a lazy parent, you're more than likely going to fall into the category of control because rules are a replacement for being there. Rules are for the lazy parent, and they're completely unnecessary. Of course, if this is all you know up until this point, I'm not calling you that you're making the choice to be lazy, but now, hey, you know that finding win-win situations takes a lot more creativity. It takes time. That if you're just focused on obedience, that is such a one-way street and a one-way ticket for your child to be raised narcissistic. How many of you know somebody or have a parent that's narcissistic? I know almost every person listening. Think about the way that they were raised. And I can guarantee it was extremely disciplined, strict punishment, probably way worse than what you dealt with. Every generation is hopefully getting better and better. And my children won't even have to be dealing with this. I mean, it's going to be a thing of the past. Hopefully, with human evolution and awareness and raising of consciousness, it wasn't very long ago that women's rights came into the scene. And before we know it, this whole punishment, spanking, timeouts, this whole control is going to be one sad memory in regards to children and parents. What are the basic normal childhood needs? If a child is physically healthy, well-nourished, satisfactorily exercised, and not tired, the youngster's physical needs are being met. A youngster who has received sufficient and continuous satisfying attention, affection, and recognition from parents and other adults, and children whom the child is emotionally attached, the child's social and emotional needs are fulfilled. If a child's normal curiosity, exploratory nature, and intrinsic interests are regularly allowed opportunities to unfold and develop, the intellectual needs of that child will be well satisfied as well. When young children are given opportunities with a securely supportive and trustworthy environment to become increasingly more independent, make choices, and meaningfully participate in decision-making, their normal need to exercise control over their lives and to express their own will are being appropriately addressed. It's very important for parents and parents to learn the developmentally normal characteristic of each stage of a child's human development. They have on naturalchild.com, you can find these lists. They're really helpful. The research literature clearly states that the opposite is true. The well-disciplined child, I've skipped a line. It's also important to recognize a myth that exists in our society that fully meeting a child's need will spoil them. We were just talking about that. But the research literature clearly illustrates that the opposite is true. The well-disciplined child is created when parents appropriately fulfill the needs of childhood and adolescence. Okay, I'm getting another question. Trying to pull these together. There's kind of questions in between them here. You can still comment, Mike. You said that I never raised a child of my own, so I'm disqualified from the comment pool. You are not. I have several coaching clients that I work with who are not mothers yet. I work with this woman who's a teacher, actually, and she's presenting a presentation to her school today. It was actually about empathy in children. I mean, it's the people without children. This is important for everybody. I have a lot of women who don't have kids yet and fathers. I get an email from somebody just the other day that hasn't even found a girlfriend yet, a young adult who really understood, and you were a child once, so you can comment. You're not disqualified. Okay, let's see. So, I mean, this show went by pretty quick, actually, focusing on this. And I encourage you to connect with people who are in awareness of this kind of philosophy. I think it's growing in the political realms, the anarchist and the libertarian communities. I'm speaking at a few of these kind of events this year, and I'm excited to bring this message. So this isn't just for the naturally minded folks. People that start off that way. Initially, I think people think that natural parenting or peaceful parenting was for the crunchy type of people who. And while it is for people that are more naturally minded, come to this really easily from like the attachment parenting realm, I also think that people that really are against control, government control, people that are all for freedom, people are beginning to see how this all begins. This all begins with children. It all begins with parenting because children learn what they live. How many times have you heard that? I mean, so many times you've heard that children learn what they live, but really rarely do people look at it in the way that how you treat a child, they're going to treat the world. They're going to model to other people. And kindness begets kindness, and respect begets respect. You can't force a child to respect. You can't punish a child into respecting you. They might give you the false illusion of respect to be able to get what they want or have their needs met. But to truly have somebody respect you is when they're more receptive to listening. So what I mean by that is people say all the time, my children don't listen to me. I want them to respect me. Well, I don't force obedience on my children, however, because I'm kind to them and nice to them. When I ask for help with something, or just like the whole, the staff I was telling you about that Deb and Maid Orion, when I ask them, could you please not swing that around in here? I don't want something to get broken. They're so receptive to respecting you. They know that you're not going to punish them. Okay, so we have 1 minute left. Mike says young children are not known for their reasoning ability. The child has to want to do things you like. Well, like any human being, if you're kind and receptive and you treat them and ask people to help you out kindly and nicely, they're much more receptive to doing it. Again, I'm focusing on Orion's need also, though. So in that one situation where I'm asking him to help me out, I'm totally willing to meet his need and find a place that he could appropriately use the staff, for example. All right, that was a quick show, guys. That was just the beginning of one installment of what punishments do to children. Thank you so much for tuning in. Find me on Facebook. You can listen to the show on YouTube. Thank you, guys, so much for tuning in. Have a good one.